When I look back at the last 3 years, it's almost surreal how quickly everything changed. I used to come home late, tired from 12-hour shifts, but always carrying takeout for two. Ours was the kind of apartment that looked lived in, a pile of laundry to one side, and her half-drunk coffee mug sitting on the window ledge. She laughed about how I took care of everything, and at first, it felt like a compliment. I'd write the rent check each month, swipe my card for groceries, pay the utilities, and cover the car note without ever thinking twice. She was searching for something creative and undemanding, she'd say, hopping between jobs at boutiques, art studios, and the occasional temp gig, but nothing seemed to stick. I told myself not to worry. The world was hard, and not every path was linear. Plus, I was making enough to cover it all, at least for now. The truth is, I liked feeling needed. For a while, it gave me comfort to believe love looked after itself when you removed the sharp edges, the questions, the keeping score. What I didn't realize was how easy it is to stop noticing the lines between generosity and obligation once they blur. Sometimes she'd joke, "You're my rock," as she Venmo requested a few more dollars for lunch with friends or studio supplies. Sometimes she'd look at me over the dinner table with this soft, half-apologetic smile and remind me that she didn't want to hold me back. I always replied with a smirk and told her not to worry, tacking on my little mantra, "We're in this together." But deep down, I had a tiredness I couldn't name. A kind of ache behind my chest when I'd see the balances go down and the gratitude fade. Maybe love really is about paying dues, I thought. Maybe this is just what commitment means. You keep giving and hope it's enough for both of you. So I kept my head down, paid the bills, and tried to ignore the uneasy silence collecting between every transaction. I never doubted her. Not once. Trust was just the air I breathed. From the very beginning, I believed we were different from everyone else. She would sit next to me on the couch, legs folded beneath her, chattering about art and dreams, hopes and heartbreaks. I listened to every word, storing away the things that made her smile or brought that shadow behind her eyes. When she needed money, I never hesitated. If she asked for help, I gave it before she finished the sentence. I put her name on everything. Credit cards, insurance policies, even the lease renewal, without a flicker of worry. People talk about boundaries, but with her, I couldn't see the need. I wanted her to feel safe, to know that I'd catch her every single time she leapt. Maybe I was trying to be the person I wish someone had been for me, but honestly, I just couldn't stand the thought of her feeling alone or unsupported in a world that seemed so intent on breaking people down. Looking back, I realize how much of myself I poured into her happiness. Every little victory she celebrated, a new painting finished, an interview callback, just a good day, I cheered the loudest. When she was anxious or sad, I stayed up late to comfort her, even if my own eyelids were heavy from exhaustion. I bought her little gifts, just because. I would defend her to anyone who doubted her, sometimes even stretching the truth to make her sound more stable, more grounded than she actually was. I told myself that love looked like sacrifice, like patience, like trusting without keeping score. My friends joked that I was all in, and they were right. Every future plan, every dream I pictured, included her at the center. I held on to the belief that if I gave enough of myself, the rest would fall into place. It never occurred to me that loving so completely might make me blind to certain things, because falling in love with her had felt like finally landing somewhere safe. There were little moments, looking back, that didn't quite add up. Tiny cracks in the story I refused to see. Sometimes she'd laugh off a question about her day with a vague answer, eyes darting away, saying, "Oh, nothing interesting happened. You know how it is." On weekends, when I clung to the idea of quiet mornings together, she'd suddenly remember a brunch with friends or some pop-up art event she just couldn't miss. When I asked if I could tag along, she'd smile and say, "You work so hard, you should rest." More than once she left her phone face down on the table, silenced, the screen never lighting up when I was around. If a call came in and she answered, her voice shifted, lower or softer, telling whoever it was that she'd call them back. I started to wonder if maybe she just needed more space, if maybe I was being too needy or possessive for wanting to spend so much time together. She always seemed so thankful when I let things go, So I tried to be the understanding partner. Each time my gut twisted with suspicion, I talked myself out of it. She was independent, I told myself. That's what had drawn me to her in the first place. She valued freedom, and I should too. If she didn't share every detail of her day, did it really mean something was wrong? People need privacy. When she pulled away from hugs or avoided answering texts right away, I convinced myself it was just stress, not distance. Even when she accidentally called me by someone else's name and brushed it off with a laugh. You know how scatterbrained I am. I accepted it as just another quirky thing about her. It was easier to believe in her honesty than to entertain the idea that I might be giving everything to someone who wasn't giving back. So I buried those nagging doubts and covered them up with reasons, thinking that every relationship had rough corners, and real love was about smoothing them out, not exposing them. As the months went by, she started slipping away in small, almost invisible ways. At first, it was just an hour here and there, got to help a friend move, or there's a gallery opening. I promised I'd go. Soon, though, it became whole evenings lost, and entire weekends where she'd say, "I'll be out, but don't wait up for me." She would give vague reasons, never quite telling me where she was headed or who she'd be with. I'd come home to find her gone, her side of the bed still untouched late into the night. Sometimes, I'd send her a message, just checking in, and she'd reply hours later with a short, simple text. "All good," or "Be back soon." Sometimes, there was no reply at all. I tried to trust her, pushing down the worry each time she brushed past my questions with a quick laugh and a nudge, urging me to just relax. Her secrecy deepened in subtle but undeniable ways. I noticed she started taking phone calls in the hallway, door pulled mostly shut, her voice dropping to a hush. Her phone never left her side, and the moment I glanced in its direction, she'd lock the screen or turn it over. She began locking her laptop and logging out of everything, something she'd never done before. Mail started piling up, small, unfamiliar packages, and odd bills with charges I didn't recognize. When I'd ask about a new expense or some delivery, she'd wave it off, saying it was for a friend or just something I'm working on. But the excuses started sounding thin, repeated like lines rehearsed for me. The more evasive she became, the more I tried to steady myself, telling anyone who noticed that she was just going through a lot. Because admitting the truth, that she was building a world I wasn't part of, felt far scarier than simply pretending not to see. One night after she got home late for the third time that week, I couldn't hold my questions back anymore. My voice shook a little as I asked where she'd really been, and why her phone seemed off limits now. She threw her bag down and gave me a tired, almost offended look, like I'd accused her of something unforgivable. "Why don't you trust me?" she demanded, her voice sharp. She said I was overthinking, letting my own insecurities get in the way of what we had. When I pressed, talking about the strange calls and how distant she'd gotten, she just sighed and told me she was stressed, trying to figure out her next steps, and wished I'd give her space. Her words sliced through me. "You don't need to worry, I promise. It's not what you think. I'd never do anything to hurt us." She even reached for my hand, squeezing it like she needed reassurance, just as much as I did, and for a moment, I wanted to let my suspicions melt away. Under that quiet pressure, I started doubting myself instead of her. Whenever I circled back to anything that didn't fit, she'd flip it, making me feel ridiculous for asking. She'd remind me of all I'd done for her, all we'd built together, and insist I was imagining issues that weren't actually there. "Don't you remember how happy we were?" she'd say, eyes glistening with just enough hurt to make me back down. She promised things would get easier, that we'd soon be back to normal. I clung to those promises, desperate to believe she wasn't lying. But beneath her reassurances, I kept feeling a cold distance settling in, like a draft through a cracked window, something you notice late at night but convince yourself isn't worth getting up to fix. After that night, something inside me started to unravel in slow, painful waves. I began to notice just how empty the apartment felt, Even when she was home, I went through the motions: work, bills, errands, the endless list of things that made up our lives. But with every day, I felt more invisible. She barely noticed when I left my early shifts. If I planned a dinner or a quiet night in, she'd bail for other plans, barely glancing up from her glowing phone. The words "thank you" disappeared, replaced by silence or a distracted nod as I covered her expenses yet again. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the dark window, shoulders hunched, and wonder who I'd become. Just a wallet and an afterthought. It was like giving everything and receiving nothing but shadows in return. The laughter and warmth we once shared felt like a memory fading out, just background noise against a growing, lonely ache I couldn't shake. Everything came to a head one quiet Sunday evening, right as the sun was setting, and the city outside seemed peaceful for once. I was balancing our budget alone, her name on every account, her expenses always explained away as temporary. The math didn't add up, but more than that, something in me just snapped. I couldn't find a single reason for staying on a treadmill that only made her life easier, while mine just got harder. I asked myself, if I disappeared tomorrow, would she even notice? Or would she just find someone else to pick up the check? It hurt to admit, but I finally accepted that I wasn't a partner. I was a resource, something she could use and put away, never worrying about how empty I was getting. My love hadn't been reciprocated. It had just been drained, drop by drop, until I was left with nothing but resentment and regret. That realization hit me the hardest, and in that silent apartment, I realized I couldn't keep living like someone who didn't matter. That was the first step, choosing to matter to myself again. It all started with a single, unexpected notification from my bank. I was at work, eating lunch at my desk, when my phone buzzed, an alert for an overdraft fee. That couldn't be right. I'd always been careful, never spending more than I had. My heart pounded as I opened the banking app. There, clear as day, were transactions I didn't recognize, an expensive restaurant I'd never been to, a handful of online purchases with brands I didn't know, rideshare charges at odd hours. At first, I convinced myself it had to be a mistake, maybe even fraud. But as I scrolled further, a pattern started to form. These charges went back weeks, always when she said she was out with friends or running errands. The purchases weren't outrageous singly, but stacked together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Suddenly, I saw everything differently. I logged into every account, joint and personal, and started cross-referencing dates and times, checking receipts and statements I'd always trusted before. It was all there, those little withdrawals, unexplained Venmo payments, and luxury charges she'd never mentioned. Packages had arrived that never got opened in front of me. Bills were higher than usual, and airline miles had been used for business purposes she'd never told me about. I'd been naive, just blindly hitting accept or approve whenever she tossed a bill my way. It finally sank in. I wasn't just an inconvenience. I was her funding source, her backup plan. That cold rush down my spine wasn't just anger, it was recognition. I had proof now, staring back at me from every bank statement and every penny I'd worked for and watched disappear. For the first time, the evidence was louder than my excuses, and I knew something had to change. Once I let myself really look, the evidence was everywhere. I started checking the mail before she could get to it and found receipts tucked inside her purse and coat pockets. There were fancy takeout orders from places we never went together, receipts for designer clothes I never saw her wear, and beauty products that filled new drawers in the bathroom. I even found a credit card statement she'd tried to hide behind old newspapers, every page covered with charges she never explained. My stomach turned as I added up the numbers and realized just how much had gone missing. I remembered each story she'd given me as an excuse, how each bill was just a one-time thing or for a friend or work-related, but none of it matched up with what I was seeing. Quietly, I started to feel the walls closing in. Every purchase was another lie, one I'd been told, or one I told myself just to keep the peace. But what really got me were her messages. One night, when she left her laptop open while taking a shower, I saw conversations with names I didn't know, texts and emails with receipts, meet-up plans at places she'd never mentioned, rides scheduled at times she'd claimed to be home working. She'd even sent payment requests to people I'd never heard of. The notes full of inside jokes, compliments, and thanks for a great time. It all clicked. Then, a whole secret life funded from my account, masked with half-truths and clever smiles. The reality was worse than any suspicion I'd tried to dismiss. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, loyalty, and the careless way she'd taken my efforts and built something behind my back. I sat there in the dark, scrolling through every message, each ping and notification slicing a little deeper. That night I finally stopped making excuses and started quietly saving every piece of evidence before she could hide it or twist it into something innocent. With all the evidence piled up, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. One evening, I sat her down and tried to keep my voice steady as I laid the bank statements, receipts, and credit card bills on the table between us. I asked simple questions at first: where the money had gone, who all these people were, why there were so many unexplained charges. Instead of answers, she went on the defensive, instantly raising her voice and accusing me of snooping. She told me I was overreacting, that everyone deserves a little privacy, and that I was making her feel trapped in her own home. I tried to tell her that it wasn't about privacy, it was about honesty and partnership, but the words seemed to bounce right off her. The more I asked, the louder she got, each denial sharper and colder than the last. For every direct question, she fired back an accusation. You don't trust me, you're controlling. Why can't you just leave it alone? It got ugly fast. Instead of working together to find a solution, we argued in circles, our voices loud and sharp, two people on opposite sides of the same table who couldn't reach across the gap anymore. She refused to explain a single charge, sticking to her story that I was making something out of nothing and acting like a parent instead of a partner. I reminded her, my voice breaking, that I'd always trusted her, always given her the benefit of the doubt, but she only met that with rolled eyes and more anger. The house felt colder than ever, with every word slamming a door between us that I knew would never fully open again. In that argument, all the cracks in our relationship showed at once: secrets, dishonesty, and a total lack of respect for everything we'd built. When she finally stormed out, slamming the door, I realized there was no way back to how things had been, and that I had to start figuring out what moving forward would look like, even if it meant moving alone. After that explosive argument, I felt completely adrift. My mind kept circling the same questions, replaying every sign I'd chosen to ignore. I must have looked lost, because even at work, my oldest friend, James, stopped me in the break room one morning. He'd seen the tired bags under my eyes, the constant worrying over my phone, the way I jumped every time a notification came through. When he asked if I was okay, I just shrugged, not wanting to dump my drama on anyone. But as I stood there in that cramped little room, hands shaking around my coffee mug, something inside me broke. I told him everything: the money problems, the yelling, the constant feeling of being left in the dark. I expected him to be surprised, maybe even to reassure me that it was just a rough patch. Instead, he grew quiet and serious, looking me right in the eye before he said the words I still hear so clearly. She's using you, man, and you need to get out before there's nothing left. Hearing someone else say it shook me to my core. James wasn't one for gossip or exaggeration. He reminded me, gently but firmly, that I'd been carrying the whole relationship for far too long, and it showed. He said he'd noticed the way she never showed up for me, never seemed grateful, and how she always managed to slide out of trouble when things got tough. He asked if I remembered all the times she left me stranded during parties, or bailed on simple plans at the last minute, always with some new excuse. You deserve to be with someone who actually chooses you, not just your help, he said. It hurt to hear it laid out so bluntly, but deep down, I knew he was right. Sometimes it takes someone you trust to tell you the truth you're afraid to say out loud. For the first time, I saw my situation for what it was, and not just how I wished it could be. That warning wasn't just a wake-up call. It was the push I needed to finally start protecting myself and stop waiting for her to change. After James's warning, I saw everything in a new light. I realized I couldn't trust words or promises anymore. I needed real numbers, solid proof. So I dug out every financial statement I could find. old bills, bank notifications, even those crumpled receipts that had piled up in the junk drawer. Most nights, after she'd gone out or disappeared into another room, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a notepad and a highlighter. I listed every date, every shady transaction, every cash withdrawal that didn't make sense. I checked online banking histories, credit card charges, and even went through old Venmo payments line by line. The more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Her name, her favorite places, her friends' initials, tagged beside payments I never knew about. I started keeping photocopies of anything suspicious and saved screenshots in a private file on my laptop, making sure no details slipped through the cracks. This time, I refused to let myself be confused or distracted by her excuses. I double-checked bank statements against our calendars, matching her absences to the largest charges. I scanned for overlaps, when she claimed to visit a friend but spent money across town, when she told me she was working late but paid for drinks or rides in neighborhoods she never mentioned. I even set up alerts on my accounts just to know, in real time, when money left without my approval. I realized how blind I'd been, how easily trust could be twisted into something that made me weak. With every record I kept, I felt a little more in control, like someone finally standing guard over his own life. It wasn't just about catching her this time, it was about reclaiming the security and self-respect I'd let her take from me. By the time I finished, I had a cautious hope that soon I'd be able to stand my ground, not just with her, but with anyone who thought they could take advantage of me again. As I sorted through every folder and envelope, I found a thick stack of papers near the back of the file cabinet. One I barely remembered signing. It was the lease renewal from last year, shoved between pay stubs and car insurance paperwork. She'd handed it to me in a hurry back then, telling me it was just the same as always, nothing new. Just a signature needed on the dotted line before the deadline passed. I remember being half awake from an overnight shift, my lunch growing cold on the counter as she hurried me to skim through and finish. I didn't read the entire thing that day. Every other renewal had been simple. Why would this be any different? But now, with the light of doubt shining everywhere, I opened the packet and paged through every line, every block of tiny crowded text that I'd ignored before. As I read, I stopped cold. There, buried near the bottom, was a clause giving either named tenant full authority over all financial decisions in the apartment, including the right to remove or replace the other's name from utilities, bills, and even the lease itself with only a 30-day notice. I blinked, reading it again and again, trying to make sense of how I'd missed something so crucial. Her signature was already there, written first like she'd planned it out. Suddenly memories rushed in, how she'd insisted both our names stay on everything, how she'd multitasked so many adult conversations with the landlord, how quick she'd been when bills arrived early, handling everything before I could even see them. At the time, I'd thought it was a sign of her finally helping out. Now I saw the real reason, the quiet way she'd taken control without ever telling me, using my tiredness, my trust, as the perfect cover for her plans. The air felt heavy around me as I realized just how easy it had been for her to create a trap right under my nose, hidden in the fine print I'd never bothered to read. For the first time, I forced myself to take a deep breath and actually read every single word in the lease renewal. I sat at the kitchen table, the document spread out in front of me, a highlighter in hand, fully awake and focused. The pages that always seemed too dense, boring, or technical suddenly felt urgent, like they might hold secrets I'd never thought to look for before. Instead of trusting her summary or letting myself get rushed, I read each clause and condition. The legal language was thick, but I looked up every term I didn't understand. My eyes moved slowly from line to line. I wasn't just skimming, I was reading to protect myself. Every now and then, I found something odd that made me pause. Notes in the margins from her, sections rearranged, and details we'd never discussed. I kept going, determined not to let confusion or old habits stop me anymore. As I continued through the fine print, a strange feeling settled in, a mix of anger, shame, and relief. Anger, because I could finally see how much I'd let my trust decide for me, how easily I'd accepted just sign here as the norm. Shame, because it was clear this wasn't the first document I'd blindly approved. But there was relief too, because I was doing something different now. The more I read, the more empowered I felt. I wasn't waiting for her to tell me what mattered. I was demanding the right to know for myself. When I reached the clause that changed everything, I didn't brush past it or rationalize it away. I read it over and over, letting the truth of it settle. For the first time, I knew exactly what I'd signed up for, and what I had the right to challenge. That unfamiliar but necessary vigilance became my turning point. I promised I'd never again ignore the details that could shape my whole future. My eyes kept drifting back to the fine print, the small and forgettable lines I'd ignored for so long. This time, I forced myself to go through each word slowly, my finger tracing the margins, pausing at every part that didn't make sense. I read it over and over, a single paragraph, almost lost in a sea of legal jargon. Gave her the right to act without me, on almost every financial decision. It stated clearly, either party could manage or change accounts, receive funds back from the landlord, and sign off major repairs, or even break the lease on their own with one signature. It all lined up with the quiet confidence she always had whenever official paperwork showed up. Suddenly, her eagerness to handle the details didn't look like responsibility. It looked like a setup. I remembered every small push. "Let me take care of this. You work too hard." Her voice, warm and gentle then, now echoed sharp and calculating in my memory. The shock washed over me, then burned into anger. The realization I'd been tricked by my own trust, that she'd gone to great lengths to hide this advantage from me. Here I was, thinking I was building a life on partnership, and all the while she was protecting her exit plan, making sure she held the strings the whole time. The worst part was how easy I'd made it for her. There had never been an open talk about this clause. No warning or discussion about what it could mean. Just her fast talking, my tired signature, and one signed document that told a whole different story from the relationship I thought I had. I saw in those lines the real reason she'd stayed around as long as she did. It wasn't love that kept her close. It was access, control, and the comfort of knowing she could walk away with everything if she wanted. That bitter truth filled the room, heavy and undeniable. I finally saw, in black and white, that she'd written the rules for a game I'd never even agreed to play. I remembered the exact morning I signed that lease renewal, like a short film replaying in my mind. I'd come home from an overnight shift, so tired I could barely see straight. The living room was silent, except for the rustle of papers. She moved quickly, laying the whole stack out on the coffee table, next to a steaming mug of coffee, my favorite, back when she still remembered little things like that. I sat down, rubbing the ache from my eyes while she flipped pages, pointing to all the spots where she said I needed to sign. "It's all the same as before," she told me, brushing her hair behind her ear, smiling like it was no big deal. "Just simplified. You trust me, don't you?" I nodded, chasing her reassurance, because that was always easier than questioning anything. I never realized how skilled she was at making her needs seem like small favors. She kept me moving, distracting me with stories about her day, laughing at a joke I couldn't remember, pouring another cup when my hand hovered over the paperwork. Every time I paused to actually read a line, she'd nudge me past it. "We're late already, babe. Just read it later." And in my sleepy haze, I believed her. I signed each page, barely skimming, trusting I was doing what any good partner would do. I never asked what had changed or why she wanted both our names on everything if it was just routine. I didn't see how the fine print could change the outcome of everything we'd built. Looking back, that blind trust feels like the biggest mistake of all. If I'd only taken 10 extra minutes to really read, to understand, I might have realized she wasn't protecting us. She was protecting herself. That morning wasn't about building a life together. It was about putting her plan into motion, one tired signature at a time. Looking back, the signs of her confidence and quiet manipulation were everywhere, threaded through so many little actions I'd shrugged off. She had a way of talking about the future that always sounded like it included us, but the plans were always stacked in her favor. If there was a big decision to be made, A new piece of furniture, a trip, changing insurance. She would rush to offer, "Let me handle it. I'm better with paperwork." She'd say it half joking, light and easy, and I'd feel relieved to have one less thing to worry about. When bills arrived, she'd intercept them with perfect timing, tucking them away before I got home, or brushing them aside as nothing urgent. Whenever I did notice a detail out of place, she had endless explanations at the ready, delivered with a smile and a touch that made it feel silly to doubt her. I thought her confidence was a sign of strength, of someone who wanted to contribute. Now I saw it was the perfect cover for making all the choices without me. She always seemed a step ahead, calm and unbothered even when money was tight or plans fell through. If my check was late and rent was due, she reassured me with a pat on the hand and a promise that she had it covered. I used to admire how easily she charmed our landlord or explained away odd charges at the bank, leaving me to stand by and nod as if I understood. At parties, she bragged to our friends about how on top of things she was, how grateful I should be for her organizational skills, her multitasking. I let her own that story without ever challenging it, not realizing how much power I was handing her with my trust. Her laughter was always louder when money came up, her affection softest when I was most tired or vulnerable. It was only after finding that twisted clause and connecting all these moments that I saw what had really been happening. She hadn't just outsmarted me, she'd practiced, shaping every detail so that when the truth finally came out, she'd already be standing safely on the other side. The anger hit me first, hot and sudden, unlike anything I'd felt before. I wanted to shout, break something, throw every fake promise back in her face. How could she look me in the eyes every day, let me work so hard, only to set all this up behind my back? Betrayal doesn't come with a dramatic soundtrack or flashing warnings. It creeps in quietly and only shows itself when it's too late to undo the damage. I kept picturing every moment I'd trusted her, every time I'd given her everything without question. Her laughs, the gentle way she'd squeeze my shoulder, all seemed soured by this new truth. How easily she'd lied, and how little my care seemed to matter to her. I thought I knew her, thought I'd built something real. Yet the reality staring back at me from those documents and memories was emptiness, just echoes of words that were never meant to last. But underneath all that anger was a deeper, sharper pain, a kind of shame that made it hard to breathe. I blamed myself for not seeing this sooner, for brushing off the signs because it was easier than facing what they meant. I replayed every decision, every yes when I should have paused, every excuse I'd made for her in front of friends, or even just to quiet the doubts in my own mind. How could I have been so blind, so eager to believe in her, that I willingly gave up control over my own life? It wasn't just the loss of money or stability, it was the knowledge that I'd handed over my trust so freely, and she'd used it as a shield to hide her plans. The realization settled heavy in my bones. I'd let myself become the perfect target, all in the name of love. Now, with everything exposed, all I could do was sit with the regret and vow not to let it define me any longer. This pain was real, but from it, I promised myself I would learn to protect what mattered, even if that meant starting over from scratch. Once the shock faded into something sharper, a stubborn, steady resolve, I realized I couldn't just let her walk away with everything. If she'd used the fine print to trap me, then I'd use it to set myself free. I sat at the table night after night, making lists and writing down every loophole, every detail she'd relied on to keep control. I read and reread the lease and every contract with fresh eyes. She was so quick to exploit the clause about removing my name with 30 days' notice, then maybe I could beat her to it. I started drafting emails to the landlord, not letting her know what I was planning. Quietly, I gathered every financial record she'd hidden, every receipt with her signature, every online order billed to my card. I researched renters' rights, called the utility companies, and even flagged a few key transactions with my bank. Each small step felt like taking back ground I'd let her claim. With my new collection of evidence, I started setting up new accounts just in my name, paychecks rerouted, utilities transferred, even my credit card company on notice for suspicious activity. I also put passwords and alerts on everything I could, quietly locking her out of accounts she'd grown used to controlling, without a second thought. Meanwhile, I kept up the act at home, acting as if nothing had changed, hiding my frustration and my newfound confidence beneath polite small talk. She had no idea the balance of power was shifting. Every time she breezed in, certain I was still the naive partner she could outmaneuver, I felt a little stronger. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting to hold on to her or the way things had been. I was fighting for myself. It was no longer about what she wanted or what she thought she could get away with. Now, it was my turn to use the rules she depended on. Only this time, I wasn't going to be the one left in the dark. I knew that if I wanted to see this through, I needed more than just bank statements and receipts. Over the next few weeks, I paid closer attention to her routines, making mental notes of every story that changed and every excuse that slipped out of her mouth. I began to quietly photograph suspicious mail and packages before she could collect them. When she left her laptop unattended, I checked the browser history, taking screenshots of travel bookings and messages that didn't match up with her explanations. I even started documenting her absences, taking down dates and times, matching them against transactions to build a timeline that proved she was lying about where she'd been and what she'd been doing. Each new piece of evidence chipped away at the disbelief that still clung to the back of my mind. It was strange how calm I felt as I put everything together. I stopped arguing, stopped complaining, and just watched, collecting proof as if assembling pieces for a puzzle only I could see. Occasionally I overheard phone calls behind closed doors, so I made note of the voices, the names she dropped, the plans she made with people I never met. I kept my questions casual, careful not to tip her off, even as my file of screenshots, photos, and copied messages kept growing. Sometimes I'd find group event invitations or thank you texts on her phone from nights she'd told me she'd stayed home. I even managed to find a hidden folder of photos from outings with friends she'd always said she wasn't close to. Bit by bit, every lie, every secret was exposed and quietly preserved. I felt more powerful with each secret I documented, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I was finally able to face the truth head on. This evidence gave me the confidence to move forward and the strength to finally see this through to the end. When I was finally ready to confront her, I didn't feel shaken or angry anymore. I felt steady, like someone who had put in the work to be fully prepared. I took my time pulling together everything, printed screenshots, neatly labeled folders, and copies of every message, receipt, and bank statement that spelled out the truth. I laid it all out on the table with a sense of purpose, not for a fight, but for closure and clarity. Before she came home that night, I rehearsed what I needed to say in front of the mirror, making sure my words were careful and calm. I wanted her to see that this wasn't about petty accusations or a jealous outburst. It was about the truth, the facts in plain daylight, and finally holding her accountable for what she'd done to me and to us. She walked in, already distracted, barely glancing up before realizing something was different. I told her to sit down, my tone quiet, but firm. I explained I wasn't interested in another round of arguments or excuses, and that this time I wanted clear answers. Then I calmly slid the folders across the table. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered was in plain view: text messages, financial records, photos, timelines. I watched her face as she scanned through the proof, her confidence flickering and then slipping away. She tried to interrupt, her voice rising, but I stopped her each time, reminding her this wasn't about yelling or blame. I asked direct questions and gave her space to respond, making it impossible to twist the story or run from the facts. That night, I found a strength in myself I hadn't seen in years, a quiet certainty that, no matter how she reacted, I was finally doing the right thing for me. As she sat across from me, her eyes flicked over the folders and papers spread out on the table. I could feel her searching for an opening, some weak spot in my composure, where she could slip back in and regain control. For the first few moments, she didn't say anything at all. Then came the denial, fast and almost practiced. She tried to laugh off the charges, shrug away the unexplained messages, and act confused about the secret accounts and absences I'd connected to her storylines. But with every fact I calmly laid out, every screenshot and timestamp I placed before her, the color slowly drained from her face. Her usual deflections and smirks couldn't land now. Her voice started to break, not with apology, but with frustration at being found out. She stammered through excuses and blamed stress, blamed me, blamed bad influences and misunderstandings. The deeper I pressed, the less convincing her stories became, until finally, she went quiet and angry tears welled in her eyes. I watched every expression, shock, then anger, then something like panic. She looked like someone who'd been caught in a lie so big there was no easy way out. She tried to take the conversation back, accusing me of spying and of setting her up, but this time I refused to get drawn into her script. I spoke slowly, refusing to argue, letting the evidence speak for itself. For the first time, she didn't have the upper hand. Her words grew softer as she realized there was nowhere left to hide. The timeline, the receipts, and every small betrayal sat between us. Undeniable proof that I wasn't just imagining things. I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me, even as she finally put her head in her hands in defeat. Facing her with the truth wasn't nearly as hard as living with her lies had been. In that moment, I knew things would never return to the way they once were, and I finally stopped wishing that they could. She didn't give up her act easily. After the first shock faded, she started hitting me with excuses and half-truths, twisting facts to try and make herself the victim. She claimed the charges were innocent mistakes, gifts for friends, work expenses, or, "I forgot to tell you, that's all." She even blamed my lack of trust for driving her to hide things, saying our problems were my fault for being too controlling and suspicious. Her voice grew louder as if volume alone could drown out the evidence between us. She tried everything from tearful apologies to sudden anger, trying to rattle me or make me question myself the way she always had. I could see the patterns now, those old strategies meant to throw me off balance, but this time I refused to bite. I reminded her calmly, over and over, that the proof was in front of us, not open to interpretation or manipulation. She moved from denial to bargaining, promising to change, suggesting we wipe the slate clean and start over, anything to avoid facing what she'd done. In the past, I might have grabbed at her apologies, desperate for a happy ending, but now, with every lie she threw at me, my patience only grew stronger. I told her clearly, I was done being the person who cleaned up her messes and ignored the truth for the sake of peace. I had every right to demand honesty and respect, and I wasn't going to settle for less. Her efforts to regain control bounced off the wall I'd finally built, one made of facts, not hope. It was hard seeing her scramble, trying to shape reality to fit her version, but I didn't back down. I knew exactly where I stood, and for the first time nothing she did or said could shake me. That moment wasn't about winning an argument. It was about knowing I had the strength to walk away from someone who'd only ever seen me as a means to an end. This time I wasn't about to let her twist things around and slide away unscathed. Every other conflict, I'd been the one to cave first, wanting peace more than answers, willing to accept bendable promises and hollow apologies. But that version of myself was long gone. With each plea she made, I kept my voice steady and reminded her it wasn't just about what she'd said or what she meant. It was about what she'd done. I let her know clearly there would be real consequences for the lies and financial betrayal. She tried to pack up her things with a huff, tossing out lines about taking a break or figuring things out elsewhere, but I stopped her before she could escape behind another smokescreen. I told her that she'd need to address every account and debt, and that she'd be removed from anything with my name on it. I laid out the plan. She would pay her share, she would return what she'd taken, and there would be no more silent deals or secret withdrawals. She tried to argue, saying she had nowhere to go and pleading for one last chance. I listened without interrupting, but I didn't waver. I calmly detailed the steps I'd already taken, secure accounts, contacted landlords, and documented everything, and that if she tried to take advantage of the fine print or hide behind legal tricks, I was ready to show everything to the right people. For once, she seemed to realize that I wasn't bluffing or hoping for her to do the right thing. The reality of consequences finally set in. She couldn't just walk away and forget the damage she'd left behind. I stood my ground despite her protests, letting go of any guilt for the first time in years. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect and reclaiming the dignity she'd quietly stolen along with my money. The look on her face said it all. She'd lost her power, and this time, I wasn't letting her rewrite the ending. Once the dust had settled at home, I knew I needed backup to protect myself from any more of her tricks. I called my older sister Lauren, who'd always been the practical one in our family. She listened quietly as I explained the mess, my name tangled on every account, the fine print in the lease, all the sneaky charges and moves my partner had pulled behind my back. Lauren didn't waste time with sympathy. As soon as I finished, she rattled off a list of lawyers she'd heard good things about and promised to look over my documents with me. For the first time since this all began, I felt like I wasn't alone. We sat at her kitchen table, side by side, sifting through papers, drawing up timelines, and highlighting the worst of the contract's traps. She pointed out loopholes I'd missed and suggested calm, steady language for emails and calls. She even reminded me to speak only with facts, not anger, to keep everything professional in case it all went to court. Next, I found a local attorney with experience in tenant rights and financial disputes. I showed her every receipt, every clause buried in the lease, and she helped me understand where I stood by law. She spotted areas where my partner had clearly crossed the line, using my financial information without my full consent, shifting our agreement without proper notice, even risking fraud in a few places. The attorney drafted letters for me, making my demands formal and legal. She explained how to remove my ex from the lease, how to block her from shared accounts, and what to do if she tried to push back or retaliate. She even warned me about common manipulations and how to document every interaction from here on out. With every meeting, I regained a little more confidence and steadiness, like I was finally building solid ground beneath my feet. The process wasn't fast or easy, but it was the safest I'd felt in ages. For the first time, I saw exactly how I could hold her accountable and make sure this story would finally end on my terms, not hers. Word started to get out before I even realized it. Lauren, ever the protective sister, felt strongly that I shouldn't keep making excuses for my ex or covering up the mess she'd created. Close friends and family had always suspected something was off. Now, with facts to back me up, I saw no reason to hide the truth anymore. When people asked why my ex wasn't around or why things were changing so fast, I kept it simple and direct. She wasn't honest with me. She used me, and I'm fixing it. The more I spoke openly, the more others started to come forward. A couple of my friends admitted they'd noticed her slippery ways, how she'd never paid her share and did her best to turn small mistakes into big misunderstandings. Even a few people from her own circle seemed to know more than they'd ever let on, quietly warning me that this wasn't the first time she'd pulled something like this. Suddenly, there weren't many places for her to hide. She lost the comfortable net she'd spun, her reputation fraying quickly among those who mattered most. Instead of rallying to her defense, mutual friends started asking real questions or backing away altogether. She tried to play the victim with a few people, but word traveled faster than she could manage the story. Group chats once filled with her jokes and updates fell silent. When someone did reach out, it was usually to ask if I needed help moving or to offer a listening ear. Watching her version of events fall apart out in the open was something I'd never imagined. It was the opposite of the secret lonely suffering I'd lived with for so long. What once felt like a private shame now shifted into a strange, shared relief. People finally saw her for who she was, and I learned that the community I tried to protect from drama was actually ready to protect me instead. With her out of the apartment, I finally had the space to start over, one step at a time. The first order of business was reclaiming control over my finances. I cut up the old joint credit cards, opened new accounts in my name only, and called every company we'd ever dealt with to explain the situation. For the first time in years, I read every line of every statement, no matter how small. I set reminders for each bill, tracked every purchase, and watched as the chaos she'd left behind slowly untangled. Admittedly, it felt overwhelming, like swimming against a current, but every day that I made a decision for myself, however small, I felt a little stronger. No more surprise charges or mystery texts about overdue balances. If something didn't look right, I'd call straight away. The fear and confusion that had gripped me for so long gave way to a new sense of confidence, brick by brick. But the real shift came when I started rebuilding my personal power, a process with no clear roadmap, just the stubborn hope that things could get better. I filled the apartment with my favorite music. I started cooking meals just for me, rediscovering flavors and old recipes that made me smile. I finally bought art I actually liked, and rearranged the furniture to suit my habits and moods, not someone else's. I kept a journal, not just for tracking new goals, but to collect every sign that I was moving in the right direction. Each day that started and ended with enough peace to breathe easy. I even reconnected with friends I'd ignored while I was with her, making time for Sunday lunches and too long phone calls. Little by little, I stopped seeing myself as someone who'd been played. I saw myself as someone who'd survived, learned, and found the strength to stand up when it mattered. That feeling of control, though quiet and new, became the most valuable thing she never thought I'd get back. There were nights when the pain felt sharper than ever, especially after the dust settled and the adrenaline faded. I'd sit by the window in the early hours, looking out at the city lights and feeling the deep ache of everything I'd lost. My trust, my peace, the vision I'd once had for our future. I'd remember the sound of her laughter in the kitchen, or the hopeful plans we'd made, and for a moment the anger would turn into sadness so strong it nearly drowned me. I let myself grieve for the love I gave, for the years spent hoping someone would see my loyalty as enough. Sometimes I cried openly, sometimes I just sat in numb silence, wishing it could all rewind to a time before any of this happened. But as the pain washed over me, I refused to push it away. I let myself feel it, knowing that real healing meant facing the hard truths, not hiding from them. And every time I let myself feel the hurt fully, I felt a small sense of release, a bit of the old weight leaving my shoulders. It became clear that my pain wasn't what defined me. What truly mattered was the strength I found in standing up for myself, even when it meant tearing down the life I'd worked so hard to build. I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I trusted myself more than anyone else. That trust became a quiet force in my daily life. I could cook new recipes without worrying about someone's tastes, spend my paycheck on things that brought me joy, and open the mail without fear of bad news. Little by little, that growing sense of control made it possible to believe in my own resilience. The loss and disappointment remained, but they were balanced by a stubborn pride. I'd survived betrayal and come out stronger, wiser, and much less willing to settle for anything less than the honesty and respect I deserved. Not long after our final confrontation, word got around that she was struggling to find a new place to stay. She'd tapped out her options fast, burning through the kindness of friends who had once cheered her on. With her reputation for borrowing money now public, and her pattern of broken promises exposed, nobody rushed to offer her a spare couch or a helping hand. I heard through mutual friends that she tried to sign a new lease on a fancy apartment, this time trying her best to be the primary tenant. But the landlord had a strict background check policy, and all those missed payments and late fees she'd left in her wake, now under her own name since I'd gotten mine off the lease, came back to haunt her. She hadn't just left me with a mess, she'd built her own trail of red flags, and it finally caught up. The irony wasn't lost on me. All that time she'd maneuvered to gain control, convinced she held all the cards and could walk away unscathed. She'd left a paper trail heavy enough to stop her in her tracks. The very contracts she twisted, the financial loophole she jumped through, had now slammed the door on her next step forward. She found herself blocked from the comfort and security she'd once taken from me. My friends joked about karma, but I didn't feel smug. If anything, it felt like life had just balanced the scales in a way I never could have planned. She was left facing the consequences of her own games, and I moved on knowing I'd survived not just her betrayal, but the gloom she tried to leave me under. Her downfall wasn't my doing. It was simply the world mirroring back the reality she'd worked so hard to hide. With each passing week, I noticed her name came up less and less in conversation, and when it did, it was no longer a weight that pressed down on my chest. Instead, I focused on building the routines that finally belonged to me alone. I started waking up early, taking quiet walks in a park not far from my new apartment. I joined friends for dinner again, this time laughing without worrying if I'd face passive-aggressive texts later. My mind was clearer, and the decisions I made, big or small, felt like they truly mattered now because they were only for me. I made new plans, set new goals, and learned to trust my own judgment in a way that once felt impossible. The memories that had once haunted me started to lose their power, replaced by snapshots of days where I felt proud of who I was becoming. As the months rolled on, I stopped second-guessing every choice, and the tightness in my chest finally released for good. The apartment, which used to feel like a reminder of what I'd lost, turned into a place of peace and self-respect. I let myself dream a little bigger, apply for jobs I once thought were out of reach, and save for trips I'd always wanted to take. What she'd done no longer defined me. Instead, it was the steps I took after, the confidence I built from nothing, that truly shaped my new life. I realized I was free, not just from her control, but from the nagging doubt that I'd never see the other side of betrayal. Day by day, I grew into someone who didn't just survive heartbreak. I thrived, stronger and clearer about what I deserved. The shadow she cast was gone. In its place was a light I'd made for myself, and I stood taller every time I chose my own happiness. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to give your trust away when you're hungry for connection. I wanted so badly to be the dependable one, the one who could fix anything with patience and love, that I missed the warning signs right in front of me. Trust, I learned, is precious but fragile. It's something you offer with hope, but you have to pay attention to how it's received. I confused trust for self-sacrifice, thinking that proving myself loyal again and again would earn me the honesty and care I needed in return. It took being betrayed on such a deep level to see how much I'd let my own value slip through the cracks. From now on, I promised myself that I'd never let those red flags slide, no matter how badly I wanted someone to be good for me. That doesn't mean I'll stop believing in people. It means I'll believe in myself just as much. Vigilance has a different meaning for me these days. It's not about waiting for something to go wrong or being suspicious of everyone I meet. It's about noticing the details, listening to my gut, and standing up for my boundaries, even when my heart aches to let things go. My self-worth isn't tied to how much I can give or how forgiving I can be. It's rooted in knowing that I deserve respect, honesty, and real partnership. I might have lost money and time, but I gained a sense of myself I'd never known before. I understand now that real love never asks you to look away or shrink yourself down just to keep the peace. If someone values you, they show it in actions, not just words. That's a lesson I'll carry with me into every new chapter, stronger than the fear or the memories of someone else's betrayal. Mornings have a different feel now. There's no rush to hide anything, no tension waiting to boil over while I'm making coffee. Instead, my apartment is filled with quiet, peaceful, not lonely, a pause I use to gather my thoughts before stepping out into the world. I find satisfaction in the smallest things again, opening the windows to let in fresh air, tidying up a space that's finally mine, choosing what to cook for dinner with no one else's preferences but my own. I celebrate each bill paid on time, every balanced budget, and every plan that unfolds without unexpected, anxious surprises. For the first time in years, I am not walking on eggshells, but standing on solid ground. This calm isn't just a break from chaos. It's proof that taking my power back was more valuable than anything I lost. Sometimes, I catch myself smiling for no reason, simply content with the rhythm of my own quiet victories. I see my reflection in the mirror and recognize someone who survived, rebuilt, and refused to stay defined by anyone else's greed or selfishness. There's a new strength in how I carry myself, not from holding on to grudges, but from letting go and knowing the difference between caution and fear. The scars she left don't sting anymore. They're reminders that I am capable of healing. When I lock my door at night, I feel completely safe. Not because someone is there, but because I trust myself to keep it that way. I learned my lesson, paid the price, and walked through fire to come out better on the other side. That, to me, is true victory. A quiet, steady peace. I earned one careful step at a time, and a future that finally belongs to me. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone starting to feel uneasy in their own relationship, it's this. Don't ignore the little doubts. Love might persuade you to brush off things that don't add up, but trust your instincts when something feels wrong. I learned the hard way that silence in a relationship isn't always peace. It can be a warning that your voice is being drowned out or dismissed. Pay attention to the difference between healthy understanding and emotional manipulation. Take an active role in your shared responsibilities, especially money, and don't leave everything in someone else's hands just because it seems easier. Ask questions, set boundaries, and don't shrink away out of fear of being called controlling or suspicious. True partnership means being open and honest, not hiding secrets or making excuses for unacceptable behavior. I know now how easily you can believe someone's good intentions, especially when you want so badly for them to love you back the way you love them. But remember, your worth isn't measured by how much you give or by how many red flags you ignore. Think about what you'd tell a friend if you heard their story. Then give yourself the same care and protection. Don't let anyone convince you that your need for honesty or security is a flaw. The strongest thing you can do is to pay attention, ask hard questions, and walk away if respect is missing. I wish I'd trusted myself sooner and paid closer attention to the fine print, both on paper and in people's behavior. If you're reading this and something inside you feels familiar, listen to that voice. You don't have to stay in the dark, and you don't have to stay with someone who makes you feel invisible. Your peace of mind and self-respect are always worth fighting for. Looking back, the lesson that sticks with me most is how easily we miss the fine print, not just in contracts but in everyday life. I remember skimming those documents, never thinking those tiny words could shape my whole future. But it wasn't just about legal language. I learned that the real fine print often hides in those moments we wave off as unimportant. The shrug when someone can't explain where the money went, the nervous smile when you catch them in a lie, the rushed signature on a paper you didn't bother to read. Details matter, not because we need to be suspicious all the time, but because paying attention is how we protect what's ours. Each small detail I overlooked was another thread she tugged loose, until everything I trusted started unraveling. If there's one thing I'll never let myself forget, it's that truth is almost always hiding in the details. Skipping over them doesn't make them go away. It only gives someone the space to write their own ending without you noticing. My biggest mistake was thinking that trusting someone meant letting go of caution. Now I know that real love and partnership can only grow when both people are playing by the same rules, above the table and in the open. It doesn't mean you have to read every line with suspicion, but it does mean that if something makes you pause, you owe it to yourself to look closer. The fine print on a contract, in a conversation, or in someone's behavior shouldn't scare you, but it should remind you that your security isn't found in hope or good intentions. It's built on careful steps, honest talks, and a willingness to ask questions until you feel safe. That's a lesson worth holding on to no matter what. I never thought justice would come quietly, or in a way that felt almost poetic. While I didn't set out for revenge, life somehow brought everything back around in a way I couldn't have scripted better myself. After I had taken her off every account and closed every loophole, the change was almost immediate. She was left with her own mess, her name now tied to overdue balances and debts, with no one else to take the hit for her. The landlord wouldn't negotiate an easy move for her without my approval, and bank after bank started sending her those same cold notices I'd received months before. Instead of struggling to protect what little I had left, I found myself in a different position, secure, organized, and ready to move on, while she had to face the reality of life without a fallback. She'd built that safety net for herself with my trust, but once I cut off her access, the net unraveled exactly the way she wove it. The most poetic part was how exposed her actions became, and how their impact rippled through her life instead of mine. Friends she'd leaned on before kept their distance, tired of the stories and tired of being second in line to her schemes. Even in her new circles, her story couldn't outrun the trail of missed payments and broken trust she'd left behind. She had always been skilled at turning the narrative to suit her, but now every twist led her back to the truth she couldn't escape. I realized I never had to shout or destroy her reputation. I simply had to step back, take care of myself, and let the facts surface on their own. Watching her face real consequences for the first time gave me more closure than any angry confrontation ever could. I walked away, not just free, but knowing that sometimes the universe handles justice on its own terms. You just have to give it space to work. I sometimes think about how hard she worked to control every little detail, shaping things just enough so the truth would stay hidden while she benefited from someone else's effort. Every scheme, every twist of the story was designed to keep her ahead, never having to answer for her choices as long as someone else would pick up the pieces. She used the fine print to box me in, thinking I'd always be too tired, too trusting, or too afraid to read between the lines. But in the end, her own manipulation was the very thing that undid her. When all her shortcuts and loopholes finally turned into roadblocks just for her, the irony was impossible to miss. What she built for her own gain became a wall she couldn't climb, and she found herself alone on the other side. As news spread and doors closed to her one after another, I saw what real backfiring looked like. The circle of friends and opportunities she prided herself on slowly faded away, and those who wanted honesty and trust no longer called her up. She tried to reposition herself as the wronged one, but the evidence of her actions spoke louder than any story she could spin. It wasn't just me who saw her clearly now, it was everyone who mattered. All her efforts to win at any cost led only to her own loss, and it wasn't just poetic justice, it was fitting. I learned that people who rely on tricks and secrecy may get ahead for a while, but eventually, that web snaps and traps the one who spun it. When I saw how alone she was left, chasing the security she once took from me, I felt a final wave of release. Her manipulations hadn't only failed, they'd crashed back onto her, spectacularly, and I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. It took time, but I finally reached a point where my life felt truly mine again, clear, simple, and free from old shadows. I looked at my bank account and saw numbers that were steady, each dollar earned honestly and spent with care. The sense of dread that used to come with checking bills or opening new statements was gone. I started small, setting a budget, tracking my habits, planning for things I wanted instead of making up for someone else's mistakes. I saved for a weekend trip, splurged on a few things that were just for me, and found new joy in the act of being responsible, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Every month, as I watched my balance grow and saw the results of my work, I felt a spark of pride that wasn't touched by old bitterness. This was my victory, steadily earned, bit by bit. More than anything, regaining control over my life meant letting go of the feeling that I was just a victim of someone else's choices. I started rewriting my own story, focusing not on what had happened to me, but on what I could make happen for myself. It was a shift from surviving to thriving, and every choice I made brought me closer to the life I deserved. I filled my home with reminders of this new chapter, fresh flowers on the table, art I picked out with real thought, shelves filled with books I actually wanted to read. My friends noticed the change, a lighter laugh, a confidence that didn't come from anyone else. The lessons from my past remained, but now I wore them like invisible armor instead of chains. I was no longer someone who'd been played or taken advantage of. I was someone who had learned, grown, and claimed back every part of my happiness from the ground up. I used to believe betrayal was something that happened in dark corners, always hidden and impossible to catch, unless you were willing to dig deep or act out of character. Now I know it can walk right beside you in the open, disguised by sweet words and routine gestures. The worst kind of deception isn't always dramatic. It's quiet, weaving itself into daily life so gently you almost thank it for being there. What finally freed me wasn't some dramatic showdown, but the moment I started paying attention to the details. It was the question I finally let myself ask, the receipts I finally double-checked, the signatures I finally read. By turning on the light in those shadowy places, I found the truth. And once it was out there, the lies couldn't survive another minute under that kind of honesty. If you find yourself questioning, feeling small doubts you can't quite name, look a little closer, listen to that unsettled voice. Betrayal survives best in silence and ignorance, but it collapses quickly in the face of careful attention. I learned that it's not weakness to question, and it's never wrong to want clarity and respect. In the end, all it took to bring the truth to the surface was courage, little moments of bravery stacked together until I could see the whole story. The world is full of people who hope you won't notice the small things, but you owe it to yourself to keep your eyes open. I did, and in doing so, I not only uncovered what was hidden, but I built a life where trust is earned, not just given. That's what finally made me whole again, and I wouldn't trade that lesson for anything. I never imagined that one day I'd actually be grateful for the hardship I went through, but it's true. I look at the person I am today, steady, self-sufficient, aware, and realize how much I've grown. There's a level of control in my life that I'd never known before. I make every decision for myself, no longer swayed by anyone else's agenda or desperate for their approval. I know what my boundaries are, I keep a close eye on the details, and I trust my own judgment above anyone else's smooth talk or empty promise. The days of feeling invisible, unsure, and manipulated are over. I don't let anyone pull my strings, not friends, not family, and especially not someone who can't tell the truth. I'm done being played. Those days are behind me. Now, when I walk into my apartment, it feels like a safe place because it's truly mine. Every piece of furniture, every sound in the morning, every strand of light through the window. It stands as a quiet affirmation that I am in charge of my own life. I pay my bills, save for the future, and look at my history as proof that I can survive and thrive, no matter what comes next. When people ask how I managed to get through it, I smile and simply say, I stopped letting someone else write my story. No longer trapped by worry or lost in someone else's web, I face each day, knowing that lessons learned have made me stronger and more awake to the world around me. I've taken the power back for good, and I'll never give it up again.